A lot of us are online today from the regional team. And we have 3 different teams, one in Berlin, one in the Frankfurt Main area, and one in the Munich Bayern area. But so if you're dialing in from any of those areas, make sure that you reach out to any one of the people who are part of that regional team. And also, if you are in a different area of Germany and you're interested in establishing a women-ed region there, also do be in touch with me. I'd really love to expand our network. And if you're in a different country and that doesn't have a women-ed group yet, also do reach out and I can help you get that established as well. So without further ado, let me just introduce a little bit about Women Ed. So Joya, if I can get the next slide, please.
Sure. Okay, 1 sec.
So Women Ed is really a grassroots movement. It started as a Twitter hashtag and people who were just kind of, I guess they were venting about different issues that were coming up in their schools. And they were thinking about, you know, what was not fair, what things they were seeing that didn't promote gender equity in educational institutions. And the education is globally 70% women. But when it comes to educational leadership, those statistics are turned on its head, right? And so we were wondering why that was happening. Are we actually getting the best people in the jobs making decisions for girls and boys, right? And so we're thinking about that. And so Women Ed started in the UK and the story then grew from there. And all of the different networks then was established. There's a strategic group of Women Ed leaders from around the globe, and they support us, and then we organize events. It really is something where you build a community in your local area. So we're looking forward to having face-to-face, in-person events at some point in the near future. But until then, we're also really happy to be able to bring to you today our first ever online conference. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague who's from the Frankfurt Regional Group, Joya, who's going to introduce our opening keynote.
Yes, I'm super excited. So hi, everybody. My name is Joya Morash. I am working at Frankfurt International School, and I have the honor of introducing Grace McCallum, who is our current principal. She's been there for 4 years, and she's moving on next year to become head of school at the Brasilia International School. And we are very sad to see her go. She is a mentor and friend to me, and she is inspirational. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to Grace McCallum. Before you go on, Grace, if I could just remind people, please mute yourself if you haven't already. We will not have a breakout session in this actual first keynote, but in the following ones we will. We will have a Q&A session after Grace is finished, and then you can also use the chat feature to interact. So please post your questions or thoughts. And this will be recorded and posted onto YouTube. You'll be receiving some more information on that soon after, and you can always engage with our community using the WomenEdDE and hashtag WomenEd. All right, so without further ado, here we are. Here is Grace McCallum. These are some quick facts about her. You can find her on LinkedIn and Twitter. She is a presenter and speaker. She's a literacy consultant, coach, professional mentor, conflict mediator, international education researcher, mom of 2, and author. So thank you, Grace, for being here.
Thank you so much, Joya. Oh my gosh, could I just have a recording of that intro? Play it when I leave the house every morning, and then my quality of life is going to go way up. Joya, can I ask you for a favor? I'm so sorry. When I'm trying to share my screen, perfectly timed, there was certainly an old boys club, and I was really familiar with the support offered to my young male colleagues by more experienced male colleagues. And what I really wished I'd had was a group of female mentors who were looking out for me. And that's not to say it doesn't exist. I'm sure some of you are those mentors to others, or that you've had wonderfully supportive female mentors. But for me, I didn't have that at any point in my early career. And so now that I'm more experienced, every time I do a podcast where people are curious about what the female experience in leadership is like, or an interview or a conference, people really want to hear about what that's like as a young female leader. Although I think I'm aging out of that category kind of quickly, but I'm going to hold on to it as long as I can. But when I share that my story of being void of experienced female mentors and how supportive this would have been, sometimes I get the impression that people are a little bit disappointed that I don't have an abundance of overtly sexist examples to share. Now, of course, we all have more than a few to share, I'm sure. I can think of a time where I was an interim head of school and I was at a meeting for school heads. The meeting was only for heads of school. And a man came up to me and introduced himself and he said, "Oh, it's so nice to see a teacher here. I didn't know that teachers were coming today. How cool that you have this aspiration to be a school head. What grade do you teach?" Or the time I was at a school a long time ago, and I found out that a male high school principal at the school was getting paid 30% more than I had. But I had 10 more years of experience in international education than he did. Or the time, this is one of my favorites, I think, that a male board member at a previous school I was working at was trying to push through a vote for something that he knew I didn't support. So he changed the regular meeting time from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. because I had just had a baby 2 months before. And I think he thought that would be the perfect way of blocking me from voting. Now, of course, I found ways to overcome those. Like in the last example, I brought my baby and I nursed her under a nursing cover while attending that 9 p.m. voting meeting. And I still laugh out loud sometimes when I think about the looks that I got in that boardroom. If you haven't tried it, I highly recommend it. These are examples I'm sure that we can all relate to. However, I have to say for me, it ends there. I've dealt with my fair share of sexism, but I can honestly say that there hasn't been a barrier, that hasn't been like a clear barrier in reaching my leadership goals. Now, I know that exists, and I recognize that I'm fortunate to not have experienced those as a barrier to my personal career. And I've had many female colleagues who've met challenges with breaking into leadership in a culture where the old boys club was prevalent. Those challenges are there, and we really need to work together to break that cycle. However, I had a different experience. I experienced male mentors who were eager to mentor me, and not only to mentor me, but to sponsor me, to invest in helping me grow because they saw leadership potential in me. My positive experiences with growing as a leader, and my goal was reaching a head of school role, that has been vastly positively impacted by the male mentors that I've worked with and the males that I've worked with. But what people are often really surprised to hear is that anytime I have experienced a barrier or a challenge as a leader, it's often because of a lack of female mentorship. I noticed it very early in my first leadership position. I was coordinating a brand new literacy curriculum rollout in my school. It was about 1,200 students from K to 12, and it was like a literacy coaching role. And back then it was not cool. That wasn't a thing. So it was kind of new. And our head of school at the time, he saw that I had a passion for literacy. He saw that I was competent, and he saw that I was on a pathway to leadership. So he gave me this incredible opportunity at a very young age. I was only 26, but this role stretched me and challenged me because I had to win over teachers and get them to trust me to engage in a coaching cycle with me. And they had far more years experience than I did. And I assumed that the older males that I was working with were going to give me the most pushback. I was very wrong. Looking back, I can see they really wanted me to succeed. They took me under their wing and they made it easy for me to coach them. They took time to give me feedback and they helped me grow. And I also experienced this with other females and males in my own bracket of experience. However, many of the more experienced females that I worked with had a very different approach to me. They were very challenging for me to win over. I was absolutely unprepared for this because I had a bias going into this leadership role that those were the women that would mentor me, that would pull me up, and who would want me to succeed. And I assumed this because, sorry, a little drink. I assumed this because that's what I was experiencing with women in my own age group. They were cheering me on, they were supporting me. So I assumed that these more experienced women would do that for me as well. But I quickly learned that many, and not all, but many were very reluctant to a coaching cycle with me. I was consistently faced with quite aggressive questions, actually, like, why are you in this position? What authority do you have? You're not qualified. Or more passive aggressive responses like, okay, well, this is going to be interesting. I've never been coached by someone younger than my daughter before. This trend, unfortunately, continued on as I progressed in my leadership journey. Anytime I'd be at a school where there was an older female leader and I hoped to get mentorship from and learn from, I quickly learned that this was going to be a challenge. I could think of one school that I went to where there was a female principal and she was really experienced. And I thought, this is perfect. This is so wonderful. She's so well respected. I am going to learn so much from this person. And I immediately tried to build a relationship with her when I arrived. And I was really bold in asking her for mentorship. She was equally as bold in telling me that she didn't have time. And she was also equally bold in telling me that I was the youngest principal, that the youngest female principal the school had ever hired. And she wished me luck. I think her words were Godspeed. And that was that. So that was a hard pill to swallow. But what made that pill go down a bit easier was the mentorship I received from my male colleagues. What has also been helpful is the support and the solidarity that I receive from females in my own bracket of experience. I definitely have felt the women empowerment movement strong in my generation of females. So that has been wonderful. However, now that I have some experience under my belt and I have the privilege of being able to mentor other aspiring leaders, I've heard their stories and I've learned that I'm not the only one who's had that experience. My experience isn't unique, but I wish it was. Other female leaders have experienced this void as well. So why is having a female mentor so important? As I said, my male mentors have been fantastic, but they have coached me through their male perspective. And I've learned, as I'm sure that you have, that female leaders have a very unique set of skills that are very important to develop. How I wish I had had a female mentor in partnership or conjunction with those male mentors to share these important perspectives with me. I hope there are many of you on this call that have found those supportive female mentors, but for those who haven't, I want to take this presentation today to share with you what I wish a female mentor had coached me in when I was an aspiring leader. Now, to be honest, I feel like I could do a whole weekend-long workshop on this, but I've chosen 5 main lessons that I wish a female leader who was more experienced than me had led me in when I was starting out. So the first one, oh, thanks, Joya, already on the slide. Look at that. The first one is, it's okay to break the rules. Now, I say this as a recovering rule follower. By this, like, I don't mean you can go out and just start smashing windows and breaking rules with reckless abandon. What I'm referring to are the perceived rules of applying for a job specifically. Girls are strongly socialized to follow the rules. And in school, we're rewarded for that, aren't we? Again and again. If you're a good girl and you follow the rules, you're rewarded. And what I wish someone had told me is that this rule following habit has real costs in your career when it comes to following the guidelines of who should apply for a job. You've probably all heard the following statistic, that when men apply for a job, they meet only 60% of the qualifications. But women will apply if they meet 100% of the qualifications. And even then, they feel tension around their ability to be hired. Now, when this statistic's brought up, I physically cringe, and I'm going to tell you why. It's almost always followed by the advice that women, they just need more confidence. They need more self-belief. If only women had the same amount of confidence that men have, this wouldn't be an issue. Now, as a confident and self-assured woman, I reject this. Totally. And Joya, oh, thank you. Gosh, you're like reading my mind, Joya. Look at that. In fact, a 2014 study cringes with me. It was done by the Harvard Business Review, and it showed that actually the confidence of women was the least common reason. It's more about women more than men taking the job posting of the wording of a job posting as unbendable and inflexible. So when thousands of women in the study were asked, why didn't you apply for a job that you really wanted? 62.2% said, Either I didn't meet the qualifications and I didn't want to be rejected, or I didn't meet the qualifications and so I didn't want to waste my time. Another 28.1% said, I wanted to follow the guidelines of who should apply, and I wanted to be respectful of the time of the person reviewing applications. If that's not a female perspective, I don't know what is. Only less than 10% didn't apply for the job because they didn't think that they could do the job. So more than 90% of the reason why women didn't apply for a job was because they didn't want to break the rules, or they wanted to be polite. And that's something that we have to change. What's really interesting about this is that what held women back from applying was not a lack of confidence. It was a misperception about the hiring process and a loyalty to being a rule follower. On average, men do not follow these rules, and they apply even if they only meet 60% of the criteria. And when this happens, it creates a substantial gender imbalance in that hiring pool. So what I love about this study is it shows that women don't need more confidence. However, we do need to break the rules during the hiring process as much as men do. Women need to apply for a job they want, even if they don't meet all the criteria, and not get so hung up in being polite or in rejection, because our male colleagues aren't worried about that and they're getting more jobs. The data really resonates with me because I don't lack confidence at this point in my career, and I apply for jobs that I want, even if I don't match the criteria 100% of the time. In fact, my most recent job that I've just gotten as a head of school, I didn't meet all the criteria in that job posting, but I applied anyway. And I think that's important to hear, because sometimes it's not just about what's on paper, it's about the fit, and it's about what you bring to the table when you meet people who are in the hiring process. So faith in yourself, confidence, obviously important, but so is an understanding of the job process. What's on paper is not always true. Once people meet you, they see your potential, they see your passion, they see your competency. It becomes about best fit and not necessarily tons of experience. If I'd waited till I had 20 years of experience in leadership, I certainly wouldn't be where I am today. So if you see a job you want, apply for it, because your male colleagues certainly are. You can go to that next. Oh, thank you, Joya. I swear you're right in my brain. How incredible. So number 2 is financial literacy. If you're not financially literate, you have to fix it. I'm going to tell you why. Now, I'm not saying that women don't know anything about finances, but study after study shows that there is a significant gap in financial literacy between women and men. This gap exists across countries, in different financial market developments, different international setups, as well as in different social and cultural contexts. Moreover, it's absolutely independent of a country's income level. And I would argue, I don't know if there's research about this, but I would argue that women in education who perhaps haven't prepared for a career in business or finance might be part of this gap. I absolutely fell into that category for not being financially literate. And what's worse, I didn't even know that I was in this gap. And I didn't know how negatively it would impact me as I took on leadership roles, where a passion for education won't get you very far if you don't understand the basics about how to keep your school financially healthy in the long term. It's something that I'm still working on. And I want to tell you about a time that I absolutely ate it in a budget meeting. So a cautionary tale, if you will. So I worked at a school a long time ago where budgeting for the next school year wasn't done necessarily based on enrollment, but in each division, it was based on like how well you presented your arguments for funding. And the principals ended up kind of competing against each other. And this was my first year as a principal, but I understood this. And I was determined to get funding for our elementary school for a new makerspace program. And I knew that a male principal in another division would be competing for funding for one of his own initiatives. Now, what you should know about me is I love competition. I was ready to go in there and kill it. I was like, I'm going to win. So I went into that board meeting. I was fully prepared. I had all the research about why these changes in pedagogy and programming needed to take place in STEM, why a makerspace was key, you name it, I had it. And I had also done the basics and the budget. I had factored in how much this would cost the school. I made a draft budget. I was very proud of myself. In fact, I think I was a bit smug in my presentation. It was being met with smiles and eager agreement. I was like, I've got this, everything's going well, until it wasn't. And it crashed and it burned. And I'm going to tell you why. I suddenly felt very out of place because I did not understand. They asked me this question, and it was about the nuances of the investments that the school had made and the return on those investments, and how much of those returns would be absorbed into either the capital budget versus the master budget, and the projection over time of how much of those returns we would need to use to keep the school afloat, and if I had factored that into my budget. I think I didn't know what to say. I had no idea, and it was my fault. I needed to learn. No one told me I had to. I didn't know. So for some of you listening today, you might be thinking, what an idiot. I would have known how to answer that. Good for you. Teach us, teach me. But I know for sure that there are others on this call listening who just had a small panic attack, imagining yourself in my shoes at that moment. So the gap is there. Recognize that, embrace it. You're smart. If you don't know it, you can learn it. So start by reading blogs and magazines to help you to educate yourself, to speak confidently about money. So you can go to that next slide, Joya. Thank you so much. Here are some of the ones that I love to read: The Economist, Forbes, Barron's, and Bloomberg's Business Week. There are lots of others. I think you need to find what suits you and what suits your style, but go out there and just start reading it. And once that vocabulary becomes your vocabulary, being able to speak confidently about money will become your superpower. And we need all the superpowers we can get. You can go to the next slide, Joya. The third is performance bias. It is a real thing. There will be a performance bias for you as a woman. I wish that wasn't true, but it's just the truth. We tend to underestimate women's performance and overestimate men's. As a result, research shows that women have to accomplish more to prove that they're as competent as men. My male mentors, they absolutely wanted what was best for me, and they would have coached me on this if they had known that it existed. But they are the benefactors of this bias, so they were blind to it. I started my career as a principal after seeing lots of males start new in a principal role. And I remember people simply assumed that they would do well. I didn't hear people asking them, or questioning everything they said and asking them to back everything they set up with research. It was assumed that they were competent. And I learned that I would not be afforded that same benefit of the doubt pretty quickly. I learned I had to be more prepared. I had to have an extra understanding of research to back up everything I was suggesting. And I'm guessing on the call, you're all now thinking, oh yeah, she's actually done that throughout this presentation. And that's because old habits die hard. And if you want the research, I've linked it. I also learned I needed a clearly articulated and an evidenced why, more so than my male colleagues did. Now, the good thing about all of this is it strengthens your practice. These are things that we should do anyway. I just wish that I had had a female leader who was already experienced to give me a heads up. You go into these new leadership roles after seeing male leaders in there, and you think you're going to be received in the same way, with the same benefit of the doubt. And that's not true. So you need to set yourself up for success by making sure that you know your stuff and you know how to back yourself up. It goes away after a while, but especially that first year in a leadership role at a new school that you're at, it's absolutely necessary. Thank you, Joya. So the next slide is perfect balance. And this is something that when I say that female mentorship is unique and that it's something only females can sometimes provide each other, this is one of those things. Now, I know that we're not all mothers, but if you are, I do think that this will resonate with you. When you become a school leader, people will expect you to work as though you're not a mother, but they'll expect you to mother as though you don't work. When I became a school leader, I saw my male colleagues in leadership able to do both of these roles seamlessly, it seemed. In fact, I saw the accolades they got from other colleagues about being able to be such a good father and such a great leader all at the same time. And what I didn't realize was this was not going to be the same for me. It became very quickly apparent that I was damned if I do and damned if I don't. If I reschedule a meeting to attend my daughter's science fair, in some schools I've been at, that was seen as me not being a dedicated school leader. If I didn't attend a parent coffee for my daughter's homeroom class, well, I had parents assume I wasn't an involved parent or that I prioritized my career over my family. This has been very hard for me, and it's something that's still hard for me as I progress in my leadership journey because I take both roles so seriously, and they're so important to me. And I'm surprised at how often comments are made that remind me of this challenge. I want to share a personal story with you today because I think it encompasses the tension of all working women and that working female leaders face. Some time ago, one of my daughters was diagnosed with dyslexia, and she was really struggling to read. So I was attending a meeting with one of her teachers at the school that she was at the time, and we were discussing what her learning support plan could look like. I asked this fellow teacher if there was anything that she would recommend that her father and I do at home. And she was silent for a minute, and then she looked at me and she said words that are just permanently etched on my mommy heart. And they still sting, as you can probably hear in my voice, when I say them out loud to you today. But she looked at me and she said, "Grace, have you ever considered that due to how busy you are, as a school principal, that maybe you just haven't had enough time with her at home, quality time, to teach her to read?" And now this is just a suggestion, Grace, but do you think is it possible at all to cut down on your hours or maybe take a different position that would allow you to work part-time? And I was wounded. I was stunned. And more importantly, I felt deep shame because those were things I'd already thought about myself. I felt like a bad mom. And it was one of those times where you're like, oh, I wish I had the perfect response to that. But your heart is frozen and your shame will not allow you to speak up. So I said what I think we would all say. I didn't say anything. I said nothing. I went home, I had a cup of tea, and I felt terrible. Now, the next meeting I had with her was a few weeks later. And by this time, I didn't feel shame anymore. Nay, nay. I felt anger. I knew in my heart that working full-time and setting an example of leadership couldn't hurt my daughter. I also knew, logically, that dyslexia cannot be cured by stay-at-home mothers across the world. I also knew how dangerous this kind of statement is. I asked my husband to come with me to that meeting. I was a little nervous and I wanted his support. But to his shock and to my shock, you're not going to believe this, guys. She said it again. She said the same thing to me with my husband there. His eyes were huge, like big like saucers. And I'm not sure if it was from shock or from fear about what I was going to do or say next. However, what came out of my mouth was something I'm really proud of. I was calm-ish, and I said, I didn't know how to respond to your suggestion the last time we met, but I really want to tell you today that I find this kind of perception damaging to women. And I would like to ask you to reflect on why you're asking me this question as the breadwinner of my family and not my husband, who's sitting right here next to me. That was a hard story for me to share with you, but I share it with you because it's important for you to know. And I wish someone had told me that this perception and this bias is out there. And I also share it with you because I'm sorry, there's absolutely nothing you can do to change it in this moment, but you can speak up against it and it can change over time. The last one is master difficult conversations, but do it your way. So you need to get good at difficult conversations in leadership in a way that fits you. Now, my male mentors, they taught me a lot about difficult conversations. But what I didn't learn from them was that the way we approach difficult conversations as a female is so important because of how they're perceived. They're perceived differently than if they're led by a male. So what's different? I'm not sure. I think it's the archetype of a female. A female is caring, she's motherly, she's emotionally in tune with people's needs, and she's a human giver. This clashes quite directly with the job that we must do in leading difficult conversations for growth. It also clashes with the likability trap that we commonly fall into as women. It's also so much more important for female leaders to feel that they are likable than it is for their male counterparts. In fact, there's a great deal of research about just how important that is for females, how important females perceive that link to likability and success than males do. And it's absolutely no wonder that we think this. The psychological research on success and likability penalties tell us that women and men can be viewed as similarly competent in organizations, yet receive extremely different likability scores, women's being far lower. Research also tells us that male and female leaders are liked equally if they're behaving democratically, so including others in decision-making as an example. But when acting authoritatively, or leading a difficult conversation about an employee's performance, for example, women leaders are disliked substantially more than men. And this, of course, causes us to fall into this trap of likability. This likability trap, at least in my personal experience, often leads to ruinous empathy during difficult conversations. Now, if you've not heard this term before of ruinous empathy, please add Kim Scott's Radical Candor to your summer reading list. I promise you won't regret it. Or listen to her podcast. It's hilarious. Now, I'm going to explain what ruinous empathy is in case you don't know. And we've all been there. And if you haven't, kudos. But I think you have. So you've given a colleague a difficult message, for an example, about their practice, or perhaps about their behavior or their contribution to a negative culture. You've clearly laid out what's happened, and you've also clearly laid out what needs to change. You've done a great job, and you should end it there. But then ruinous empathy takes over in our effort to be likable. So it's when you care personally, but you fail to challenge them directly. It's feedback for growth that is sugar-coated or unclear, or an ending of a difficult conversation that goes something like this. Everything's been clear, and then you say, I understand this has been so hard, and I know you've had a really hard time, and that X, Y, and Z has happened. And you know what? You're actually really great in these 25 ways. Let me give you explicit feedback on how wonderful you are in all of these ways. And I'm sure everything's going to improve. I like your hair, and I have faith in you. So, okay, that's maybe a little bit dramatic, but you get my message. It's confusing for the listener. And also, it's really unfair. To be clear is to be kind. When I began my career as a school leader, my desire to be likable turned into ruinous empathy in difficult conversations many, many more times than I would like to admit. Jennifer Abrams, who will be speaking at this conference, is a guru in difficult conversations. She was the first author I read, and I keep rereading about difficult conversations. If you haven't already, get her book this summer, listen to her podcast, explore her website, and lean into what she's saying. It's important to find a structure and a formula for difficult conversations that you don't have to follow like a script, but that it can anchor you when you naturally want to slide into the ruinous empathy habit. So today, I'm going to end with a couple of challenges for you. You can go to that next slide, Joya. Thank you so much. So, I also want to end with going back to the beginning. Where is the old girls club? We need one. Not an exclusionary club of yesteryears, or one that excludes our male colleagues, or one that competes with an old boys club, but one of sisterhood, one that recognizes that the fight for equality, it's come a long way, but female leaders still face very unique challenges. We still need each other. We need those with more experience than us to pull us up. We need the specific mentorship and sponsorship that only women know how to provide for each other. The mentorship of our male colleagues, that's critical as well. We need a balanced balcony view. But we need female mentors to share with us what is uniquely female. So I have 3 challenges for you today, and 2 are inspired by Dr. Fran Perlman, who I think spoke to you last time. She challenged us with some similar tasks at a wonderful conference that we attended with her a few months ago. If you've not had the chance to go to a conference with Dr. Franny, do it. You won't regret it. So my first challenge to all of you today is be bold in asking for mentorship. Even if you are rejected, as I was time and time again, keep asking. And if you are asked to be mentored by someone, so if you are lucky enough for someone to ask you for mentorship, I want you not to skip a beat, not to pause. The only answer is hell yes, I would love to do that. Now, my second challenge to you today is when you see a female colleague and you see potential in them, even if she doesn't ask you, offer her your mentorship. Pull up as many aspiring leaders as you can. Pull up men, pull up women, but know when you're doing that, that the mentorship that you provide women can only be provided by your unique understanding of what it takes to lead as a woman today. Now, my final challenge to you this morning is if you can't do that, if you can't find a female to mentor or coach you in your own school community, don't stop there. Reach out to some incredible women on this phone call, in the Women Ed Network, or reach out to people who've made it their life's work to pull other people up. For example, I did that. I reached out to a coach, her name is Alicia Morris, and she's been transformational in my career. She has grown me into the leader I am today, and I can say that with great confidence. You'll never be sorry that you invested in yourself. And I see here someone saying ECIS has a mentorship program. That's fantastic. If you can't find it in your community, do not let that be a barrier for you. Reach out and get what you need because you deserve it. I'm just so honored to have been able to speak with you today. Thank you so, so much for coming and for letting me speak to you. This has just been a highlight of this school term, and I'm very grateful that you came and listened. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Grace. That was wonderful. Thank you. So inspirational. Wow. Does anybody have any questions for Grace? Right now, we could go into our mixer break according to our schedule. Grace, I don't know if you have time for a couple of minutes, if there is anybody who wants to stay on for that and to ask some questions.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to.
Awesome.
And maybe I'll put my email address as well in the chat.
That would be super.
It just maybe a question comes to them later. They could always reach out.
Great.
The chat was very active while you were sharing your story, Grace, and thank you so much for your vulnerability and for sharing your experiences that I know that we are all learning from. And as you were doing so, Eleonora, who will be on our panel next, I'm really keen to hear more from her in a minute, but she mentioned the concept of a queen bee. So I don't know if you're familiar with that. So perhaps we can pick up that conversation too when we move into our panel. So I hope everyone will stay around for that. We will have a little break now, so I'm going to hand it over to Joya.
Yay. Thank you so much again, Grace. Okay, so here's, super. That's Grace's Twitter handle. Awesome. All right. So, and if anybody wants to pose any questions of Grace right now, you can go ahead. Eleanor, I believe.
Yes, I do have. Thanks, Grace, for your talk, and it was really inspiring. I have more like a business-like question for you. How did you know that you want to be a leader, not as much as like a teacher? Teaching is different to being a leader, a principal, a head teacher, something like that. Do you miss teaching, or do you still do teaching? Which one is more fulfilling for you? And how did you know that you want to go this path?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Eleanor. It was something I really struggled with, actually. When I first took on a principal's position, I almost didn't, because I've taught lots of grade levels. I taught grade 11 and grade 12. I taught grade 2, 5, 3. And I was teaching grade 3 at the time, and I loved it. I loved it so much. I mean, I loved those children. Some of them we still keep in touch today. It was really hard to make the decision, but you know how I framed it for myself is I had seen so many school leaders come in and they weren't making decisions based on what's best for children. They were making decisions on what was best for the budget, or sometimes what was best for keeping everyone happy, but not what was best for students. And I knew that I could do that. And I wanted my own children to be in a school that those decisions were being made. And so I just had to really get to the mindset of I'm leaving the classroom But rather than my influence now being on 22 kids, my influence, I can influence, 450 kids, or in my past school, 850 kids, or in my new school, 1,200. And so it's really about, if you feel like you can do a good job, do that and do what's best for all kids. I really miss being in the classroom, and I try to be in classrooms as much as I can, but it's something I do have a tension with that, Eleanor, and I still, sometimes when I have a bad day, I'm like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I need I need hugs from grade 3 students, and I'm going to go back up to the classroom. Maybe someday, you never know.
Yeah, maybe that. I was thinking about this concept of job rotation. So being a leader, but also frontline and going back and forth. So that was just a question that I was asking myself, and I thought that I don't see that many principles. So that's why I asked you. Thanks for your answer.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Sure.
Another question we have, I think, hand up there. Yeah, go ahead. You can just unmute yourself.
Hi, Grace. I'm impressed and actually very moved by your story. I'm curious when you said you approached this, other principal, a female one, and you were hoping that that person will be your mentor, and then she rejected you. Like, how did you find the way to thrive, especially when you had to work together? I'm curious.
Yeah, I usually, what I do is I usually just sort of tell myself something else. Like, I thought, maybe she's just busy, and maybe I'm sure she would if she could. But then after time passes, you realize I'm in a position now where I have at least a couple of things, not many things, but a couple of things to offer an aspiring leader. And I would do it. I would never not have enough time. So now I have a different perspective, but I did have to continue to work with her. And I just try to assume good intentions and just think, you know what, I'm just going to put that behind me and we're going to go forward. But it is hard. It is hard because it's disappointing, in sisterhood of what you hope for. So that's how I do it. I just sort of tell myself something else, but then when you reflect on it, you kind of, the honesty of it does come to the surface.
I'm just so appreciative, Grace, that you talked about something that I think is generally a taboo subject, and where women don't like to address the fact that not all women support each other, and sometimes women can be each other's biggest block. Mm-hmm. And so I just really appreciate that, and I think I honor the fact that you're willing to talk about it, because I think a lot of people don't want to. They don't want to recognize it. They don't want to name it. But I've experienced it, and I've experienced a lot of support by males and sponsorship, and not always the same with females. And so it begs the question of why. And I think that it's a really great platform, Women Ed, to really explore that and to try to understand and unpack that, because there must be some reasons, right?
There must be, and I think it's hard to talk about as women because we don't want to create this idea that women are I don't know, but the polite word you would use, catty, or we don't want to perpetuate that. And I have to say, I don't want to make this part really clear. I really structured this talk around, experienced mentors pulling others up, because the solidarity and the cheerleading and the support that I've gotten from people that I work with who are in my experience bracket has been the highlight of my career. And the sisterhood I felt with those women, I mean, it's wonderful. As Fran Perlman says, I have a lot of women around me that straighten my crown. I just wish I'd had that as a really young leader. And I did with my circle of friends or in my experience bracket, but they didn't have the experience to pull me up. I needed someone else to sponsor me. And so I hope that there are people on this call today that will sponsor others.
Great.